What happens when the weakest person in the pack holds the most powerful secret? In the frozen north, Emily is an Omega, an outcast scorned by her own Alpha and left to die in a remote cabin. During the worst blizzard in a century, she finds a massive, dying wolf on her doorstep. He's not just any wolf. He's a creature of immense power, hunted and poisoned. For 3 days, she uses her forbidden knowledge to shelter him, a secret that could get her killed. But on the 3rd day, when the storm clears, it's not the hunters who arrive, it's the Alpha King himself, and he's not here for the wolf she saved. He's here for her. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It was a thin, shrieking sound that clawed at the new-growth pine logs of Emily's cabin, searching for any crack to invade. For Emily, an Omega of the Shadow Creek pack, this cabin wasn't a home. It was a sentence. It sat 3 miles from the official pack border, perched precariously on the stony ridge overlooking the Blackwood Pass. It was a place of exile, a dumping ground for the pack's only worthless member. Emily's lineage was a stain in the eyes of her alpha, Marcus Thorne. Her grandmother, Anya Petrova, had been a healer, but she dealt in herbs and poultices, not the brute strength and rapid regeneration the pack valued. When Anya died, Emily, who inherited her gentle nature and her grandmother's strange-smelling cupboards, was deemed a relic. Useless. At 22, she was small for a werewolf, her shift a pallid, undersized grey wolf that earned her nothing but scorn. She spent her days foraging, her hands perpetually stained with dirt and herbs, trying to remain invisible. But invisibility was a luxury her pack's future alpha, Vanessa Thorne, rarely granted. That very morning, just as the first iron-grey clouds began to swallow the sky, Vanessa and her 2 sycophantic followers, Chloe and Liam, had ridden their ATVs up the path. They hadn't come to check on her. They came to remind her of her place. "Still playing in the dirt, Emily?" Vanessa had sneered, kicking over the carefully stacked bundle of firewood Emily had spent 3 hours gathering. The split logs tumbled into the wet snow. "The blizzard is coming, Vanessa. I need that," Emily had said, her voice barely a whisper, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. To meet an Alpha-born's gaze was a challenge. "You need to learn your place," Liam had grunted, shoving Emily back. She stumbled, landing hard on the icy ground. Maybe the storm will finally freeze out the rot in this pack. Vanessa laughed, a sound as sharp and cold as the air. "Look at her. Pathetic. My father, Alpha Marcus, only lets you stay out here because he's too compassionate. If it were up to me, I'd have driven you out into the deep wastes long ago. You're a disgrace, Omega." They had left, their laughter mixing with the rising wind, leaving Emily to regather her wood with bruised ribs and a frozen heart. Now, 12 hours later, the world had vanished. The blizzard had descended with a fury Emily had never seen. It was a solid wall of white, a physical weight against her small cabin. The temperature had plummeted to a degree that was dangerous even for their kind. She had stuffed rags in the door cracks, her small fireplace roaring as it devoured the wood Vanessa had almost cost her. She huddled under a threadbare quilt, sipping a weak tea made of pine needles and dried rowan berries. She wasn't just cold, she was achingly lonely. The pack was 3 miles away, safe in the great lodge, its geothermal vents keeping the main hall warm, the pantries full of smoked meat. They were feasting, laughing, warm. And she was here, a ghost in her own life, waiting for the storm to pass. The wind reached a new crescendo, and the entire cabin groaned in protest. The structure was old, built by her grandmother's hands, and it was failing. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. If the roof collapsed, she wouldn't last an hour. It was then, above the shriek of the wind, that she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the cracking of a branch or the scream of the storm. It was a low, resonant thud that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her floorboards. It was followed by a long, terrible sound, a deep-chested groan of agony that was almost human. Emily froze. Her wolf senses, though weak, were sharp. Something was outside, something large. A rogue, a bear awakened from its hibernation. Either would mean her death. Rogues were driven mad by isolation, and a bear would tear her cabin apart to escape the cold. Stay hidden. Don't make a sound. You are worthless. You are small. You are invisible. The pack's insults had become her mantra of survival. Another thud, this time against the cabin wall itself. A heavy body slumping. Then, a desperate, guttural scratching at the door, a sound of claws dragging weakly against the wood. It was followed by a whine so deep with pain that it vibrated in Emily's own chest. It was a wolf. A very, very large wolf. Emily crept to her single ice-caked window, rubbing a small patch clear with her sleeve. At first, she saw nothing but the swirling vortex of white. Then, a shadow resolved itself. A mountain of black fur, half buried in a snowdrift that was rapidly swallowing it whole. It was collapsed against her porch, its massive head resting on the first step. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary wolf. It was enormous. Even in its collapsed state, it was twice the size of Alpha Marcus's formidable beta. Its fur was the color of jet, a stark contrast to the white snow that was now tinged with a horrifying dark crimson. It was dying. Her survival instincts screamed at her to bar the door, to feed the fire, to wait until morning. But her grandmother's instincts, the healer's blood she had been taught to despise, screamed louder. Compassion, Emily, Anya Petrova's voice echoed in her memory, is the oldest magic. It's the one they've forgotten. Don't you forget it too. The wind tore at the cabin, threatening to rip the door from its hinges. The wolf outside gave one last, shuddering sigh and went still. Emily looked at the fire, then at the door. Letting it in was madness. It was a rogue, a stranger. It was a threat. It's a life, the other part of her whispered. Clenching her jaw, Emily grabbed the iron poker from the fire. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely breathe. She unlatched the heavy wooden bar, and the door was instantly ripped from her grasp, slamming open against the interior wall. The blizzard roared in, a living monster of ice and sound, extinguishing her candles and sending embers scattering from the hearth. The cabin was plunged into a chaotic, freezing darkness, lit only by the faint, angry glow of the fire. And in that chaotic darkness, the great black wolf collapsed over her threshold and onto the floor, bringing the scent of pine, blood, and a power Emily had never encountered. The wolf was a giant. Sprawled on her rough-hewn floor, he filled the small cabin. Emily had to use her entire body to fight the blizzard and force the door shut, barring it against the storm's rage. For a moment, she stood panting in the semi-darkness, the wind now a muffled scream, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cabin was instantly, dangerously cold. But the wolf was burning. She could feel the heat rolling off him from a yard away. He was shivering violently, his massive limbs twitching. A low, continuous moan of pain rumbled in his chest. He's dying. Emily grabbed a dry log and threw it on the fire, coaxing the embers back to a roaring blaze. The light spread, illuminating the creature, and she gasped. His black fur was matted with blood from a dozen wounds, but one was horrific. A deep, jagged gash ran along his right flank, from rib to shoulder. It wasn't the red of fresh blood or the brown of old. The edges of the wound were sizzling, blackened, and emitting a faint, sickly green vapor. Silver. Not just any silver. This was imperial silver, a poisoned, enchanted metal designed not just to wound a werewolf, but to unmake him. It burned through their healing abilities, scorching flesh and magic alike. It was a weapon of execution, used only by the Alpha King's royal guard or by high-level assassins. Who was this wolf? His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. He was burning with a fever that was meant to incinerate him from the inside out. Okay, Emily whispered, as much to herself as to the beast. Her fear was eclipsed by a sudden, sharp clarity. This was what Anya had trained her for. She ran to her grandmother's cupboards. While the pack saw her as a collector of weeds, Anya had taught her the truth. She pulled down glass jars filled with dried, fragrant herbs. Silverbane, her grandmother's voice guided her. They call it wolfsbane and think it a poison. Fools! It is a poison to the silver, not to the wolf. It draws the toxin out, but it needs a catalyst. She grabbed a black, sticky lump of pine resin and a pouch of dried moon petal. Her hands, which had trembled to open the door, were now steady. She ground the herbs and resin together with a mortar and pestle, the pungent, acrid smell filling the cabin. She added a little snowmelt, warmed by the fire, until it formed a thick, dark paste. The wolf's eyes snapped open. They were not the yellow or brown of a normal wolf. They were a startling, piercing blue, rimmed with the red of fever. He lifted his head, a growl tearing from his throat, a sound so full of authority that Emily froze, her omega instincts screaming at her to submit. I'm trying to help you, she stammered, holding up the wooden bowl with the poultice. The wolf stared at her. He was clearly an alpha, but his scent was different. It was the scent of an ancient forest, of ozone before a lightning strike, and of something metallic, like a crown. He was beyond any alpha she had ever known. He tried to rise, to put himself between her and the door, but his legs buckled. He collapsed, a whine of frustration and pain escaping him. "Please," Emily said, approaching slowly. "That silver will kill you if I don't draw it. Please, let me help." She kept her eyes low, showing her throat in a sign of submission. But she did not stop her approach. He watched her, his blue eyes burning with a suspicious, feral intelligence. He was deciding if she was a threat or a meal. She reached his side. The heat from his body was staggering. Gently, so gently, she placed her hand on his head. He flinched but didn't snap. His fur was coarse, like a wire brush. "This is going to hurt," she whispered. With a deep breath, she took a handful of the silverbane poultice and plunged it directly into the poisoned wound. The wolf's roar was apocalyptic. He threw his head back and bellowed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that shook the very logs of the cabin. He thrashed, his claws scoring deep gauges in her floorboards, his teeth snapping shut inches from her face. Emily screamed and scrambled back, but she did not drop the bowl. I'm sorry. It's the only way." The wolf shuddered, his body convulsing. The black paste was sizzling where it met the wound, the sickly green vapor rising in a thick plume. The smell was horrific, like burning acid and rotten meat. But it was working. The poultice was drawing the poison, sacrificing itself to save the flesh. The wolf panted, his eyes rolling back. He was losing consciousness. Emily knew she had to be fast. She scrambled forward again, ignoring the danger, and packed the rest of the poultice deep into the gash. She grabbed her cleanest rags, strips of an old linen sheet, and bound the wound tightly, wincing as the wolf moaned. She worked for an hour, cleaning his other, minor wounds. They were already closing. His natural healing was fighting back now that the silver was being neutralized. Exhausted, she collapsed against the far wall. The fire crackled, the storm raged, and the giant, unknown alpha wolf lay unconscious on her floor, his life tethered by the thread of her forbidden knowledge. She had just invited a nuclear bomb into her tiny, fragile life. She had no idea if she had just saved herself or damned them both. She pulled her quilt around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving the stranger, and waited for the dawn. The blizzard didn't stop. If anything, it intensified, entombing the cabin in a world of suffocating white. The sun was a forgotten rumor. Emily woke from a stiff, fearful doze in her chair, to find the wolf exactly where he had been, but his breathing was deeper, more even. The fever, however, was still raging. She spent the day in a tense, quiet routine. She fed the fire, log by precious log. She melted snow for water. Every 2 hours she checked the poultice. The rags were soaked in a foul-smelling, greenish-black ooze. The Silverbane was doing its work, pulling the imperial poison from his body. She had to change the dressing 3 times. Each time she had to wake him. I need to clean it again," she'd whisper. His blue eyes would snap open, instantly coherent, instantly dangerous. He would growl, a low warning rumble, but he allowed her to tend to him. He watched her every move, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. He was weak, but he was all alpha. She was an omega, acting with an authority she had never been allowed. The power dynamic was a knife's edge. She made a thin broth from dried mushrooms and jerky, the last of her good stock. She held the small bowl out to him. He ignored it, looking at the door, then at her. "You need to eat," she insisted. "Your healing is fast, but you're burning through everything you have." He turned his head away, a clear dismissal. "Fine," Emily muttered, frustrated. "Starve. See if I care." She drank the broth herself, glaring at him. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the wind and the crackle of the fire. She was trapped with a silent, wounded prince who looked at her like she was an interesting and potentially disposable puzzle. The fever broke. Emily woke to a cabin that was blessedly not an oven. The wolf was awake, and he was sitting up. He was no longer slumped. He sat on his haunches near the fire, his back straight, his massive head held high. He looked like a king on a throne of rags. The wounds on his body were gone, leaving only new pink skin. The great gash on his flank was still raw, but it was closed. He had torn her linen bandages off. Emily's breath hitched. He was magnificent, and he was terrifying. He looked at her, and then, in a movement so fast she almost missed it, he shifted. It was not the pained, cracking shift of a normal werewolf. It was a fluid, silent unmaking and remaking. Where the wolf had been, a man now sat. He was, Emily thought, the most dangerous-looking man she had ever seen. He was naked, his body a roadmap of old scars that spoke of 100 battles. Even sitting, he was tall, with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. His hair was as black as his fur, long and tied back with a leather thong, and his eyes, they were the same piercing, electric blue. He didn't move to cover himself. There was no shame in him, only power. He simply looked at her, his gaze missing nothing. He scanned the cabin, noting the dried herbs, the small cot, the single window. Emily, flustered, grabbed her grandmother's spare quilt, the good one, made of thick wool, and held it out. "Here." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something, amusement, in his eyes. He took the quilt and wrapped it around his waist, standing in a single, graceful motion. He was well over 6 feet, and he dwarfed her small cabin. He walked to the hearth, picked up the iron poker, and tested its weight. He glanced at the flimsy bar on her door. He looked back at her, and he said nothing. "I'm Emily," she offered to the silence. He just nodded, his gaze returning to the door, as if listening for something only he could hear. You were dying," she continued, needing to fill the quiet. "It was imperial silver. I used a silverbane poultice. My grandmother taught me." His head snapped back to her, his gaze sharpened. He truly looked at her then, his blue eyes scanning her face, seeing her, really seeing her. For the first time, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it. He remained silent for the rest of the day. He sat by the fire, a dark, brooding statue, a coiled spring of lethal energy. He ate the food she offered this time, devouring the jerky and dried apples with a controlled hunger. He drank water, and he watched the storm, his silence more unnerving than any threat. The storm was ending. The wind had died from a scream to a low, mournful sigh. A pale, watery light began to filter through the ice on the window. The silence in the cabin had become a shared, breathable thing. Emily had stopped trying to talk. She sat at her small table, mending a tear in her cloak, while the stranger, she had taken to calling him Kalen in her mind, a name that felt as old and hard as he was, stood by the window, staring out. He was fully healed. The gash on his side was just a silver-white scar, a new addition to his collection. He had found a pair of her father's old trousers and a shirt in a chest, left behind years ago. They were too short in the arms and legs, but they were better than the quilt. He had been watching the pass below for an hour, his body utterly still. "They are coming," he said. His voice startled her. It was the first time he had spoken. It was a deep baritone, like rocks grinding together, laced with an authority that demanded obedience. Emily's blood went cold. "Who? The ones who hurt you?" "No," he said, turning from the window. His blue eyes were not cold, not exactly. They were filled with a weary, ancient knowledge. Worse. He looked at her, and his expression softened for the first time. It was a fractional change, a slight easing of the hard lines around his mouth. "You saved my life, Emily," he said, his voice rough. "You, an omega of a cast-off pack, did what no royal healer could have. You used the old magic. I just did what my grandmother taught me. You did more than that. You bound yourself to my fate." He looked back out the window. "And I have brought a terrible storm to your door." "The blizzard is over," she said, confused. "Not that one," he pointed. "That one." Emily moved to the window and looked down. The snow was deep, pristine, unbroken, except for a dark line moving up the pass. It was a convoy. 2 black, armored vehicles, designed for deep snow, were grinding their way up the mountain, and behind them a dozen men, all in black tactical gear, were moving in formation. They moved with a speed and silence that was not human. "Who are they?" Emily whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Is that Alpha Marcus? Did he see the smoke?" "No," the stranger said, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife he'd produced from somewhere. "That is not your pathetic local Alpha." He looked at her, his face grim. "That is the Alpha King's royal guard, and they are not here to be polite." Emily's heart seized. The Alpha King. The king had not visited the Northern Ridge territories in 3 generations. He was a myth, a figure of ultimate power who lived in the Sunstone Citadel, 1,000 miles south. His royal guard were legends, bogeymen, silent, silver-clad executioners, and they were walking up her path. "What do they want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Do they want you?" The stranger, Kaelin, gave a short, bitter laugh. "They always want me. But this is different. They're moving too openly." A sudden, terrible thought struck her. Harboring a rogue or a traitor. It's a death sentence. They'll kill me. Kaelin's gaze hardened. He looked from her to the door and back. "They will not touch you." "How do you know? You brought them here." Panic made her voice sharp. "You said I bound my fate to yours. This is what you meant." Before he could answer, a thunderous pounding echoed through the cabin. It wasn't a knock. It was a demand. "In the name of the Alpha King Theron, open this door!" A voice roared, amplified by a megaphone. But that voice, Emily knew that voice. It was deep, guttural, and filled with self-importance. It wasn't a king's herald. Kaelin's head tilted. "That," he growled, "is your local Alpha." Another pound. "Emily, open this door now, or I'll huff it down. We know you're in there, you filthy rat." It was Alpha Marcus. Emily looked through the peephole, and her blood turned to ice. Standing on her porch, flanked by 4 of his largest pack warriors, was Marcus Thorne. Behind him, preening in the new snow, was Vanessa, a cruel, triumphant smirk on her face. They weren't with the king's convoy. They had gotten here first. "They must have tracked the vehicles," Kaelin murmured from behind her, his voice a low vibration. "Your Alpha is a fool. He's trying to get ahead of the king, to prove his loyalty." "Prove his loyalty," Emily breathed. "How?" "By finding me," Kaelin said, his hand on her shoulder, "and by sacrificing you." The door shuddered under a heavy boot. "Last chance, Omega," Marcus bellowed. Kaelin squeezed her shoulder. "Unbar the door." "What? He'll kill us." "He will not," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to that register of pure command. "He is a puppy playing wolf. Open it and stand behind me." Her fear of Alpha Marcus was primal, beaten into her since childhood. But her fear of the man beside her, and, strangely, her trust in him, was greater. Her hands shaking, she lifted the heavy wooden bar. The door flew open. Alpha Marcus stood there, his chest puffed out, his face red with cold and fury. Vanessa was right behind him, her eyes glittering with malice. "So!" Marcus barked, his eyes sweeping the cabin. He saw the empty bowls, the blood-stained rags, and then he saw Kaelin. Marcus's eyes widened, then narrowed. He couldn't sense Kaelin's rank. The man's control was absolute, but he saw a rival male. "Harboring a rogue, Emily?" Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with false righteousness. "Aiding an unknown male? That is a death sentence by pack law." "Father," Vanessa said, her voice like honeyed poison. "Look, she's been tending to him. The little traitor." She stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at Emily. "We tracked a rogue scent here, a scent of poison and blood. And here he is. She has betrayed the Shadow Creek pack." Emily started, but Kaelin's hand on her arm silenced her. "Alpha Marcus Thorne," Kaelin said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the cold air, silencing the clearing. The pack warriors shifted, suddenly uneasy. This was no cowering rogue. Marcus, enraged at being addressed by an unknown, stepped forward. "You do not speak to me, rogue. You are on my land, and you have corrupted my Omega. You will both be purified by—" "Silence!" The word was not spoken by Kaelin. It came from the path. The 8 men in black tactical gear had appeared from the trees, fanning out in a silent, perfect perimeter. They were armed with silver-laced blades and rifles. Marcus's 4 warriors, who had looked so large moments before, suddenly seemed like children. Alpha Marcus froze. He hadn't seen them arrive. His face went pale. The black-clad soldiers parted. A man walked through their ranks. He was tall, like Cailan. But where Cailan was a storm, this man was a mountain. He wore no tactical gear, just a long black wool coat and leather gloves. His hair was a dark auburn, his face clean-shaven and aristocratic. His eyes were a piercing, cold grey. He didn't just walk, he advanced. The snow seemed to crunch louder under his boots. The air pressure in the clearing dropped. Alpha Marcus and his warriors instantly dropped to one knee, bowing their heads, so low their faces nearly touched the snow. Vanessa, her smirk gone and replaced by a mask of terror, did the same. Emily, standing in her own doorway, was the only one left standing, along with Cailan. The man stopped 10 feet from the porch. His grey eyes swept over Marcus, then Vanessa, then Emily. Finally, his gaze landed on Cailan. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. "Brother," the man said, his voice resonating with absolute power. "You led us on a miserable chase. Must you always make things so dramatic?" Alpha Marcus, still on his knees, let out a small, strangled gasp. "Brother, this was him. This was Theron, the Alpha of Alphas. The king." The world fell into a terrifying, frozen silence. The king. The Alpha King, Theron, was standing on Emily's porch. Cailan, the stranger she had healed, the man who had slept by her fire, did not bow. He stood tall, the cheap shirt straining across his shoulders, and met the king's gaze. "Theron," Cailan said, his voice flat, "you always did hate the cold. You should have stayed in the citadel. And let you wander off to die in a ditch?" Theron's cold smile widened. "What a waste of my best commander. You've been playing Lost Prince for long enough, Cailan. It's time to come home." Emily's mind reeled. Commander. Not just a prince. Not just the king's brother. His best commander. The man she had ordered to eat his broth was Cailan, the iron hand of the king, the wolf who had supposedly gone rogue 2 years ago, disappearing from public life. He was a living legend, a ghost story told by pack alphas to scare their betas. Alpha Marcus was visibly shaking, his head still bowed. He had just threatened to execute the king's own brother. Vanessa, however, saw an opportunity. She scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of desperate, false sincerity. "Your Majesty!" she cried, rushing forward and stopping only when one of the royal guards put a hand on his blade. She knelt again, 5 feet from the king. "Your Majesty, thank the moon goddess you are here. We had no idea. We tracked this rogue," she spat the word, "to this hovel. This wretched Omega," she jabbed a finger at Emily, "was harboring him. She hid him from us. She's a traitor to the pack, and to the crown." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not—" "Silence, filth!" Vanessa shrieked, all pretense of manners gone, replaced by raw panic. "She tried to poison us when we arrived. She threatened us in your name, Your Majesty. She said she was protecting him." She pointed at Cailan. "For a rival Alpha. She's a spy." It was a waterfall of lies, so blatant and absurd that Emily was struck dumb. Alpha Marcus, seeing his daughter's play, quickly joined in. "It's true, my king. This Omega Emily, her bloodline is tainted, unstable. Her grandmother was a hedge witch, a dealer in poisons. Emily has always been a stain on our pack, and now she has proven her treachery. We caught her. We were about to detain her and the rogue for you. We serve only you, Your Majesty." Marcus was practically groveling, trying to rewrite the last 5 minutes, painting himself as the loyal soldier who had captured the king's runaway brother and the traitor who'd helped him. Emily's world was crumbling. It was her word, an Omega's, against a ranking Alpha and his daughter. She would be executed on the spot. She looked at Cailan, pleading, but his face was an iron mask. He was watching his brother, the king. King Theron had not moved. He listened to the cascade of accusations, his grey eyes unblinking, his expression unreadable. The only sound was Vanessa's heavy breathing and the click of the royal guards' silver-laced weapons being armed. When Marcus and Vanessa finally fell silent, the king tilted his head, as if considering their words. He looked at Cailan. "A spy? Is that what you are now, brother? Working for the Stone Fang pack?" Cailan scoffed. "Don't be an idiot, Theron. I was poisoned by an assassin carrying Stone Fang markings, the same ones who targeted—" Cailan's voice cut off, a flicker of deep pain in his eyes. Theron's face hardened. "I know. That's why I'm here." His gaze shifted from Cailan and landed on Emily. He didn't look at her with contempt, like Marcus. He didn't look at her with curiosity, like Cailan had. He looked at her with a chilling, profound focus, as if she were a word he didn't understand. He took a step onto the porch. Marcus and Vanessa flinched. Theron stopped in front of Emily. He was so close she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. He lowered his head, not in a bow, but like a predator identifying a scent. He inhaled deeply. Emily trembled, but she didn't back down. She had faced down Cailan in his wolf form. She would not cower now. Theron's eyes closed for a brief second. He smelled the air in the cabin, the lingering, acrid tang of silverbane, the sweet, faint aroma of moon petal, the sharp scent of pine resin. His eyes snapped open and locked with hers. "You," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You made a silverbane poultice." It wasn't a question. Emily just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "The wound," Theron said, turning to Cailan. "Show me." Cailan, without a word, pulled up the side of the cheap shirt. The scar was there, stark white against his skin, perfectly healed, barely 3 days old. Theron stared at it. He reached out a gloved hand and traced the scar, a look of utter disbelief on his aristocratic face. 3 days, Theron whispered. He was struck with a blade laced with wraith silver. Our royal healers, our top physicians. They said it would take a month to neutralize. If he survived at all. He turned back to Emily, his grey eyes burning with an intensity that terrified her. Vanessa, sensing the tide turning, tried one last time. "But your Majesty, she's a—" "Alpha Marcus," Theron interrupted, his voice lethally soft, never taking his eyes off Emily. "Yes, Your Majesty?" Marcus whimpered from his knees. "You said this Omega, Emily, is worthless? A stain on your pack?" "She is, my king. She's nothing. A useless, dirt-digging—" "Then," King Theron said, his voice rising to a terrible, controlled roar, "you are the biggest fool in the 9 territories." The power that rolled off him was a physical blow. Marcus was flattened to the ground, as if by a giant hand. Vanessa screamed. Theron turned on Marcus, his face a mask of royal fury. "I did not come here for my brother. He was a beacon, a diversion. I came here because my mother, the Queen, is dying. I came here because the Oracle at the Citadel, Dr. Evelyn Reed herself, declared that the last practicing lunar herbalist of the Ash Line was hiding in the most pathetic backwater pack in the northern ridge." He spun back, his black coat flaring, and pointed one gloved finger directly at Emily's chest. "I did not come for him," Theron bellowed, his voice echoing off the mountains. "I came for her." The silence that followed the king's proclamation was absolute. It was so complete that Emily could hear the hiss of snow falling from a nearby pine bough. Marcus Thorne was frozen, his face pressed into the icy slush. Vanessa, for the first time in her life, was utterly silent, her mouth open in a perfect O of horrified disbelief. Emily just stared. Me? King Theron's fury seemed to recede, replaced by a desperate, strained urgency. He stepped fully into the cabin, his gaze sweeping over the hanging bundles of dried herbs, the meticulously organized jars, the mortar and pestle still stained with the Silverbane paste. "Anya Petrova," Theron said, his voice softer now. "Was she your grandmother?" Emily nodded, mute. "Anya Petrova," Theron said, more to himself than to anyone else, "was my mother's first healer. Before the schism, before the Alphas decided that brute strength was the only magic that mattered, before they burned the libraries and drove the herbalists into hiding." He turned to Marcus, his eyes full of contempt. "Your father, Alpha Marcus, was one of the purists. He hunted them. He believed the healers were diluting the bloodlines. He drove Anya Petrova from the citadel and left her to rot on this mountain, believing her useless." He looked back at Emily, his grey eyes searching her face. "My mother, Queen Seraphina, is dying. An assassin poisoned her a month ago. The same poison," he gestured to Kaelin, "that struck my brother. He was hunting the assassin when he was ambushed. He was trying to find a cure himself." Kaelin finally spoke, his voice low. "I wasn't just running, Theron. I was running here. I heard a rumor in the lowlands, a whisper of an old-world healer in the Shadow Creek territory. I never dreamed it was her." His blue eyes met Emily's, and she saw a profound, aching gratitude. "Our healers are powerless," Theron continued, his voice tight with a pain he clearly despised showing. "The Wraith Silver is bonded to her heart. It's killing her by inches. Dr. Evelyn Reed, our chief physician and oracle, spent a week in a trance. When she woke, she said only one thing. Find the granddaughter of Anya. Find the last lunar herbalist. Only she remembers the counterbalance. Only she can draw the bonded silver." He took a step closer to Emily, his royal pride dissolving to reveal the desperate sun beneath. "You healed my brother in 3 days from a mortal wound. My mother, she does not have 3 days." The universe had just tilted on its axis. Emily, the Omega. Emily, the filth, the rat, the useless, dirt-digging stain. She was the only person in the world who could save the Queen. It was too much. Her legs buckled. Kaelin was there instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist, holding her up. He was so strong, so warm. He anchored her as her world spun. Emily licked her lips, her voice a dry rasp. "She needs Moonpetal and Silverbane. But she also needs Heart's Ease to slow the pulse and purified iron salts to bind the poison after it's drawn. It's a filtration, not just a poultice." She was reciting the old lore, the words bubbling up from a place of deep memory, taught to her by Anya in this very cabin. King Theron's eyes widened. He knew. He knew she was telling the truth. "Then you will come?" he said. It was not a request. Vanessa, seeing her entire world, her status, her power, her future, evaporating, finally snapped. "No!" she screamed, lunging forward, her face a mask of jealous rage. "She's a liar! She's nobody! A fraud! My father is the Alpha! I am the Alpha-born! You can't just take her! She's ours!" She didn't get within 5 feet. One of the royal guards moved, a black blur. He didn't strike her. He simply backhanded her, a casual gesture of dismissal. The force of the blow sent Vanessa spinning into a snowdrift, her lip split and bleeding. "My apologies, Your Majesty," the guard said, his voice a digitized monotone. The asset became hysterical. "Alpha Marcus," Theron said, his voice returning to the flat, cold tone of a king passing judgment. Marcus pushed himself up, his body trembling so hard he could barely kneel. My king, I didn't know. I swear on my blood. I didn't know. It was ignorance, not malice. Please. Ignorance, Theron repeated, the word tasting like ash. You had a priceless jewel in your care. A woman who holds the key to my mother's life, the last of a sacred, ancient line. And you put her in a shack. You let your child torment her. You called her worthless. It was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake, Marcus sobbed, real tears of terror freezing on his cheeks. You are correct, Theron said. It was. And you will pay for it. King Theron's judgment was as swift and as cold as the blizzard that had just passed. He was no longer a desperate son. He was the Alpha King, the ultimate authority, and his wrath was terrible to behold. He looked down at Marcus Thorne, his face carved from ice. You, Alpha Marcus Thorne, have proven yourself unfit to lead. You are a man of brute force and no vision. You mistreated a subject of the crown, a person of irreplaceable value, out of petty, ignorant pride. Your pack is a disgrace. No, your majesty, please, Marcus begged, crawling forward. I can fix this. I'll give her the Great Lodge. I'll make her my beta. Please. You will give her nothing, Theron snapped. As of this moment you are stripped of your rank. The Shadow Creek pack is hereby dissolved. Its lands and its people are forfeit, absorbed directly by the crown. My royal guard will oversee the transition. You are an alpha no more. You are, Marcus, a lone wolf. It was a fate worse than death, to have his pack, his status, his very identity, stripped from him. Marcus let out a high-pitched, broken sound, a keen of despair, and collapsed, shuddering, into the snow. He was a broken man. Then Theron's cold, grey gaze turned to Vanessa. She was clutching her bleeding lip, her eyes wide with a terror that was part fear, part disbelief. And you, Theron said, walking toward her. Vanessa Thorne. I am Alpha-born, she whimpered. You were, Theron corrected. You are the product of your father's arrogance. You are cruel without purpose. You are loud without substance. You took pleasure in tormenting one who could not fight back. You lied. To your king. He crouched, forcing her to meet his gaze. You told me Emily was a traitor. You accused her of poisoning you. You demanded her execution. You seem to enjoy the cold, Vanessa. You enjoy judging others and casting them out. Please, I didn't mean it. Then you shall have what you desire, Theron said, standing. He turned to his guard. Commander Talon, this one is to be exiled, not to the civilized south. Take her to the frigid wastes, to the prison colony at Icebreak Peak. She will serve a life sentence, mining silver iron for the crown. We shall see how the real cold treats her. The karmic justice was so perfect, so terrible, that Emily almost felt a pang of pity. Vanessa's mind broke. She screamed. It wasn't a word, it was a raw animal sound of pure horror. No, no, I'm Alpha-born. You can't. Father, do something. Father! Marcus didn't even look up. He was a hollow shell. Two royal guards seized Vanessa by the arms. She thrashed and kicked, her designer snow boots digging uselessly. I'll kill you! She shrieked at Emily, her face contorted with hate. You are a nobody, a filthy Omega. I'll kill you! Take her, Theron ordered, turning his back. I am tired of her voice. The guards dragged her away, her screams echoing down the mountain path until they were finally muffled by the trees. Justice had been served. The clearing was silent again, save for the sound of Marcus Thorne's pathetic sobbing. King Theron turned back to Emily. His entire demeanor softened instantly, the transition so abrupt it was dizzying. Lady Emily, he said, and the title made Emily flinch. I am in your debt. My brother is in your debt, and my mother. Her life is in your hands. He formally bowed. Not a nod, but a deep, respectful bow from the waist. The Alpha King, bowing to her. My personal transport is at the base of the mountain, he said. We must leave immediately. Bring whatever you need. My men will carry it. Emily looked around the tiny, cramped cabin, this hovel, this prison, this sentence. It had also been her sanctuary. It had been her grandmother's home. She looked at Kaelan, who was watching her with an expression of quiet pride. She looked at the king, a man who held the power of life and death, who was now looking at her with desperate hope. She walked back inside. She passed her small cot, her empty pantry. She went to the loose floorboard beneath her grandmother's chair. She pulled it up. Inside was a small, velvet-wrapped bundle. She unrolled it. It was Anya Petrova's set of tools, a small, silver-handled knife for cutting herbs, a crystal mortar, and a small, leather-bound book. The book was blank. Anya told me the recipes are not for paper, Emily said, her voice quiet. They are for the blood. The book is for the new recipes. She tucked the bundle into the waistband of her trousers. She grabbed her worn winter cloak. I am ready, she said. The journey down the mountain was a strange dream. Emily, who had not been more than 5 miles from this cabin in her life, was now flanked by 8 of the most elite warriors in the world. King Theron walked beside her, respectfully asking quiet questions about the local flora. Kaelan walked on her other side, his presence a solid, warm shield. He didn't speak, but his eyes were constantly scanning the woods, protecting her. They passed Marcus Thorne. He was still kneeling in the snow, a man erased. He didn't even look up as she passed. The shadow he had cast over her entire life was, in an instant, gone. At the base of the mountain, the 2 armored transports sat humming. They were not vehicles. They were mobile fortresses, sleek and black. A guard opened the door to the Lid transport. It was a rolling command center, filled with screens, plush seating, and a small medical bay. It was warmer than her cabin had ever been. Lady Emily, Theron said, gesturing for her to enter. She stepped inside. Kaelan followed her, sitting opposite. The king sat beside him. The door hissed shut, sealing them in a world of quiet, warm efficiency. With a lurch, the transport began to move, speeding away from the northern ridge, away from Shadow Creek, away from the only life she had ever known. For a long time, Emily just looked out the armored window at the blur of snow and pine. You were looking for me, Emily said to Kaelan, breaking the silence. You knew about the healer. Kaelan nodded. A rumor. A dying assassin I captured whispered it. That the Stonefang pack had failed to kill the Ash healer years ago, and that she was the only one who could reverse the Wraith Silver. I thought I was looking for your grandmother. I came to beg for her help for my mother. But the Assassin's Guild found me first. They poisoned me and ran me to ground. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. When I collapsed on your porch, I thought I was dead. I thought I had failed. And then I woke up, and the poison was gone. And I saw you. He shook his head, a small smile on his lips. The Fates have a dark sense of humor. You're a commander, she said, still trying to fit the pieces together. The Iron Hand. Why would they? I was head of the King's intelligence, Kaelan said. I've been hunting the Stonefang assassins for 2 years. They are a radical sect who believe the King's bloodline, my bloodline, is too tame, too reliant on peace and diplomacy. Like Marcus, Emily whispered. Exactly like Marcus, Theron affirmed, his voice grim. This rot has spread deep. They want to return to the old ways, brute force, culling the weak. They see my mother's compassion, her funding of the Citadel's hospitals and universities, as a weakness. They targeted her to break my father's heart, and to break my rule. But they targeted you too, Emily said to Kaelin. I was the one getting too close, Kaelin said. I was the only one who believed the rumors about the ash line still existing. They wanted me dead, and they wanted you dead, to erase the only cure. Emily finally understood. She wasn't just a bystander. She was a target. Her worthless bloodline was the one thing the assassins feared. By staying small, by staying hidden, she had survived. She looked at Kaelin, the wolf she had pulled from the snow. And he looked at her. A bond had been forged in that cabin, in those 3 days of silence and healing. It was a bond of life debt, of shared secrets. It was something new and something ancient. I don't know if I can do it, she whispered, her fear returning. She's the queen. I'm just Emily. Kaelin reached across the transport and, for the first time, took her hand. His was calloused and warm, engulfing hers. You are Emily of the Ash Line, he said, his voice soft, but with the same iron certainty he'd had in the cabin. You faced down a dying, feral alpha. You faced down your tormentors, and you faced down the king. You are not just Emily. You are the one who saved my life, and you are the one who will save hers. King Theron watched them, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He is right, Lady Emily. Your grandmother's legacy is in you, and for the first time in a month, I have hope. Emily looked down at their joined hands, then back out the window. The snow-capped mountains were already disappearing behind them, replaced by a dark, winding road leading south. She was no longer an outcast. She was no longer an Omega. She was a healer. And she had a queen to save, and that is where Emily's old life ends, and her new one begins. The Omega who was scorned by everyone, who was left to freeze in a remote cabin, turned out to be the most powerful person in the kingdom. She not only saved the king's brother, but she held the key to saving the entire royal line. She's on her way to the capital, with the fierce Commander Kaelin at her side, and a kingdom's fate resting on her shoulders. But the assassins who poisoned the queen are still out there. They know she exists now, and they will stop at nothing to prevent her from reaching the Citadel. What did you think of Emily's story? What about the justice served to Alpha Marcus and Vanessa? It just goes to show that you should never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. This is just the first part of Emily's journey. If you want to find out what happens next, if she can save the queen, if the assassins will find her, and what will become of the powerful bond she's forged with Kaelin, let me know in the comments below. And if you loved this story, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good story of karmic justice, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening.